Okay, I'd like this to be a summary of my electrical ideas, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see if I can pull it off. I presented these ideas the way I presented information to our children when my wife and I homeschooled. I try to keep it simple as possible. I try to use terms and ideas that are relatable. All right, and I also almost always look for a connection to nature or biology, because biology is in everything, and I try to find a connection to see if nature or the unconscious world is naturally providing something, okay? So I adopted ideas or created them or invented them, and then I rejected some. So let me review that quickly. I put emphasis on the cycle itself that's generated in a generator. This cycle is depicted. You can see it on an oscilloscope. I call it a cycle graph or a revolution graph. That's how you can kind of look at it with that electronic test instrument. I prefer the term single cycle and the term triple cycle, and I rejected single phase and three phase, and I explained why that's not accurate and not concise. I use the term offset and not out of phase. I use the term live rather than hot. And I introduced the term median, which is a complement, but you could call it a complement, the median or the complement, instead of the term neutral, trying to get rid of neutral. It's a really crappy term. And I introduced the concept of send-return or alternating send and return in electricity, such like you'd find in music equipment for entertainment, amplifiers and effects boxes and such, okay? So I adopted quite a few terms and I rejected some, okay? Now, all this is based on very simple concepts because I'm not a professional. I have no schooling, no training, so I just use common sense stuff and ideas. For example, here's your AC generator. And the generator spins 60 times in 1 second, okay? So when this goes around one time, you have a time period of 1/60th of a second. And this is a generator, all right? And it creates that one cycle in 1/60th of a second, right? And the word cycle comes from the Greek word kyklos, which means circle. So cycle, circle, is kind of the same thing. And it's very simple, which is good. All right. Now, one revolution is one cycle. And in America, we use 60 revolutions per second. It's called 60 hertz. Okay. So that's very simple. Now, the cycle graph that you get on your oscilloscope will look kind of like this. This is kind of barbaric, but it's the best I could do. All right, so you see that in your cycle graph, okay, it shows one cycle, and that takes 1/60th of a second, and you have two phases. Current goes one way during this phase, current goes the other way during this phase, all right? That's just one cycle, a single cycle, in a mere 1/60th of a second. I already talked about that and explained it. And in this cycle graph, okay, you have two phases. A phase is a distinguishable part in a course or cycle. It's a distinguishable part in a course or cycle. So you have two parts and they make a whole, or you could say you have phase A plus phase B equal one cycle. The key thing is each phase is different. When you're talking about a phase in single cycle, it's one or the other. They are not the same, right? So in AC theory, technically, the only application in AC theory in which the term phase could be used sensibly would be with single cycle service, all right? Most people call it single phase, but I want to try to put an end to that. Because why? It's not single phase. It's not split phase. Nothing is split. And it's dual phase. You could say dual phase. Dual. Yeah, there are two phases. But it's still one cycle. One revolution of that generator. All right? So if you called this single phase, then this would be a phase of a phase. And that would be a phase of a phase. And a phase of a phase is actually a segment. And this is not called segment A and segment B. All right? Now in triple cycle, which you would call three-phase, all right, you have three cycles. And the key thing here is each cycle, here's cycle one, right? Goes like this. That would be the single cycle on your other graph. But you have more cycles. But you see, except for this crappy drawing, the cycles are identical. The cycles are identical. They are not distinguishable from each other in and of themselves. The only key thing here that we have going in triple cycle is one cycle is offset and yet another is offset. They are offset cycles, not out of phase. Now, getting back to the analogy of nature and biology, it took a while, but I tried to find something in nature that is based on and relies on the concept of phase and cycle. I had to find something that I could show you that says, well, in nature, phase and cycle are there all over the place, but they're used in a specific way. So I found the dolphin. Well, and I found the whale too, but the dolphin's easier because most people are familiar with dolphins because they think they're cute and all that. So if you look at your cycle graph here, all right, that little snapshot, that little moment in time, you have a dolphin, all right? Now the dolphin has two halves of a brain. They have one half and then they have the other, just kind of like we do, all right? And if you made a cycle graph, you could say that, okay, well, here's your alertness, whether you're awake, okay, the waking state, or the sleeping state, you could say that, and here's your time, all right? And you have a cycle graph. And let's say, okay, instead of electricity, let's say one cycle is 1 day. Let's say it's 1 day, and let's say, time-wise, let's say that dolphin swam 60 miles in a day in a circle. We're just saying this, we're making this up. Let's say he or she swims 60 miles in a day. Okay? So what you have then is you have the left brain is awake. The left brain is awake. And simultaneously, while the left brain is awake, the right brain is sleeping. You have two different phases, waking and sleeping. So then at some point, all right, the left brain goes to sleep and the right brain wakes up. And here you have phase and phase. You do have different phases, but within each cycle, all right, you have two phases. And within each cycle here, you have two phases. So you still have two single cycles, only they're operating simultaneously. You understand? So phase in nature and biology is very important, but it still creates one cycle. And the dolphins and whales have to do this because if they actually went to sleep with both half the brains, they'd be bumping into stuff all the time. They'd be bumping into each other, other fish and boats, stuff like that, right? So the dolphin, does the dolphin help us in our revision of terms and concepts in electricity? Well, the left brain and right brain each function independently. They perform two different functions. Each side of the brain then could be considered like one generator, the left generator and the right, okay? Because they're making two different things happen. Whereas in your single cycle electricity, two different things aren't happening simultaneously. One direction here, then it reverses here. Okay, do you understand that? Now, you have one brain in the dolphin. It's in two halves, but there's two opposing cycles. Now, you could call this a double cycle, dual cycle, but you wouldn't call it two-phase or split phase or out of phase. You wouldn't call that, because this phase and this phase are part of one cycle, and this phase and this phase are part of another. So if you want to use terminology the way you would with electrical, you would actually have four phases here. Two phases A, all right, in one time period, and two phases B. So even with the dolphin, the dolphin or whale, the example that nature provides, you still wouldn't really have two phase. You just can't justify it, right? So then, moving on, right along, I introduced the term median instead of neutral, right? Median or complement, either way. Somebody can submit this to the National Electrical Code people, and the code-making panels just say, you're nuts, this is stupid. After 138 years, we're not going to change it because our stuff is perfect. Well, you know, everything has to evolve. Everything has to get better at some point. That's the way life goes. Okay, now, I stressed with single cycle, you have one coil in your transformer, right? And you have one send-return pairing. That's black and red. You see black and red here. I talked about that. And I talked about how, essentially, theoretically, this is really only one long conductor. But for the sake of understanding and wiring and such, we generally speak of these as two different conductors. And of course, they're two different colors. Now, for triple cycle, in the transformer, you'll have three coils here on your secondary side, right? But the key thing is here, to understand my idea, is you have three send-return pairings. We talked about that. Black and red, black and blue, and red and blue. I can barely see that. I hope I'm speaking correctly. Right, so you have that. You have single cycle, and your median, which you would call a neutral, I call it a median, is tapped into the median point, the center point, the middle. And over here, you have the median tapped into this coil. That's how you get your 120 volt legs. All right? And you see here that people say, oh, no, this is called a neutral. That's stupid. Don't call it median. And they say, no, it's here at the center tap, and there's nothing going on. It's neutral. And I say, no, take your hand and grab onto this center tap here and see nothing happen. And I say that from experience because a friend of mine accidentally, when he was working for a cable TV company, touched one of these transformers and was fried to death, literally like a piece of chicken. So I know this from experience. Now, single cycle, one coil, the median taps into the center. Triple cycle, right? You got your transformer. There's different kinds of transformer configurations. I'm just showing you a simple one, right? So you tap in with your median here, and here you have three send-return pairings. You have three send-return pairings, and over here you have only one send-return pairing. One single, three triple, okay? That's how I came up with my concept. I know I'm going as fast as I can. Now, I tried to find another analogy in nature or in the unconscious. The unconscious is where all knowledge is stored, and we use our brains as kind of receivers to tap into it, and we get ideas and blah, blah, blah. That way we don't have to store everything in our brains. We don't have to have a memory module that's massive. We have giant heads. So, electrical versus vascular. I talked about this. I said you have your service entrance conductors, all right? And they're analogous to your vein, all right, and your artery, and your lymphatic system. I talked about that. Got your dark blood here, all right? And then you have your red blood here, your artery, and your lymphatic fluids, which can be white or grayish or yellow. And here's your service neutral, okay? So you see here, if this is your return in electrical, you have a return in your body, biology. Here you have a send, artery sends it out. You have a send in your electric panel or your transformer. And then you got your neutral, you got your lymphatic system, which returns things, good stuff, back to your heart. So I talked about that. Now you say, well, that's a bunch of crap. Nobody talks like that. Nobody talks about the human body when it comes to electricity. Well, actually, yes, we do. And it's happening even as you're sitting there listening. You say, no, it doesn't work. You're exaggerating to make it fit your theory. No, I'm not. I have nothing to gain. I don't make a penny from this. Let's say you have a service entrance conductor. One conductor, all right? The conductor is a piece of metal with insulation on it. We could call it a wire, and inside there is copper. Copper's on your periodic table of elements, number 29, copper. It's in there. It carries a charge. All right? I won't get into the details because, first of all, I'm not qualified, and second of all, it doesn't matter. It's copper. Copper is very, very efficient at doing the stuff we need in our electrical system in our homes. Now, what about the artery? What does the artery have? Oh, the artery has another metal. They're called transition metals or transition elements. And what does it have? It has iron. And what does the iron do? The iron in the hemoglobin carries the oxygen, without which you wouldn't be sitting here watching this. You would be dead. So you say there's no analogy? You say, Joe, you're making shit up? No, I'm not. This is in your home. This is in everybody's home. Number 29, there are only three spaces away from each other on the chart. Copper here. Everybody here in America has copper somewhere. And everybody in here has iron in their blood, unless they have an iron deficiency. And this completes the analogy of electrical versus vascular, because it's an actual real thing. And I apologize for taking so long, but that should wrap up all my basic electrical ideas. I have other ones, but they're kind of weird and hard to explain. So thanks for being incredible.